Well, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the library this evening. My name is Liz Metzger, and I'm the library director. Tonight we have a special guest, and to tell you all about him, I'd like to introduce Joe DiGiorgio.
Well, I'm not going to tell you all about it. There's too much to tell. Great guy. Now, listen, we only known Matt for 2 years. And when I was first introduced to Matt, he introduced himself to me. And he says, you know, I don't know anything about history, but I've been appointed to be the county historian. And I looked at him and I said, holy mackerel. You know? But that's not true. He does know a lot about history. This guy's got great enthusiasm because in 2 years, that's all he's had this post for, and he's really only part-time. And if you've been picking up the paper, you could see what a job this guy does. He gets involved in everything and investigates everything. He is one fantastic historian. 2 years or nothing. And I don't care how old he is. I think, what, 50? I don't care how old he is. He's just fantastic, okay? So I introduce you now to Matt. Introduce you to Matt Urtz, county historian.
That was a better speech than I got on my wedding night. I don't know what that says. So, tonight we're going to talk a little bit about faces of Madison County. And this has become a popular theme in history, which is basically, we're going to show you some pictures, and I'm going to give you some clues, and I want you to tell me who the person is. Some of them are very easy. You'll know them from the photos. Some of them I doubt you'll know, but I'd like to be pleasantly surprised. All these people had some sort of impact in Madison County. What I mean by that is they lived here, their social impact happened here, and it goes across all things. And you'll notice a lot of these are actually pre-1900, there's a few after, but there's even people now, I'm going to butcher his name, but Admiral Giambastino, who is from Canastota, today is still around and making an impact, and he's from Canastota. So we're going to start with this, and if you know it, just shout it out. Any ideas? You're close. He has ties to John Adams. Actually, she has ties to John Adams.
Is it James Madison?
No. That's Colonel William Smith, and that's Abigail Adams. Abigail Adams was John Adams' daughter. They lived in Lebanon for a brief period. Colonel William Smith was born in Long Island, November 8, 1755. He graduated from the College of New Jersey, which would now be Princeton University. He began to study law. At the outbreak of the war, he decided he wanted to go to help and became an aide-de-camp to John Sullivan in 1776. During the war, he served under General Lafayette and General Washington. He was an aide to General Washington. In 1784, he took a position as the Secretary of the Legation at London under future President John Adams. It was there that he met John's daughter, Abigail. They came back to the States. They actually married in 1786. They came back to the States, and he was appointed to a number of positions. In 1794, he was granted a land parcel for more than 150,000 acres in what is now Eaton, Madison, Lebanon, Hamilton, Smyrna, and Sherwood. He lived here for about brief periods. He actually was a congressman for this area for a few years. He's buried in Sherburne. His wife died in Massachusetts, and that's where she is buried. That's kind of what we got for him. We'll try with the next one. Let's see if you do better.
We're not answering that one.
DeWitt Clinton, he's not from Canastota.
Okay. Nathan Roberts.
Thank you, Nathan Roberts. Nathan Roberts was born July 28th, same birthday as me actually, in Pine Grove, New Jersey. He attended local schools, but he actually wasn't able to gain a higher education even though he really wanted to. He worked as a land speculator in the summer, and he would actually teach in the winter. So he would teach school children in the winter, and then he would go all over the place. He traveled to Vermont. He would buy property, clear the property of the trees, make it suitable for settling, and then resell it. He came to Oneida in 1811, bought a farm in Lenox in 1814. He was appointed assistant engineer to explore and survey the route of the Erie Canal from Rome to the Seneca River in 1816 with basically little surveying experience. But he had a great desire to learn and math, and he knew he would do a good job. The state needed a way to raise the 60 feet needed in Lockport, which was basically unsettled area and just a 60-foot fall, and they put it out to design. And Nathan Roberts came up with, if you've ever seen it, what's called the 5-tier system of locks. 60 feet, just to give you an idea, that'd be roughly 1/3 of Chittenango Falls. If you've ever seen Chittenango Falls, roughly 1/3 of that he made into locks. It's actually where Lockport got its name. Spider Flag locks was chosen. Took almost 2 years to complete. He actually became quite famous for it and went on to develop locks in other states and canal systems. He died in November 24th, 1851, and he's buried right here in Canastota on Lennox Road. All right, ready?
Luke Lane?
What's that?
Luke Lane?
No. That's everybody's response. That's not from Casanova. No. That was who Casanova was named after. I don't know that he ever came to Casanova. William Jervis Howe was born in Paris in United County. His family moved to Pompeii, attended schools there. He attended what would be Casanova Seminary and passed the bar in 1820. He studied under the firm of Childs and Stebbins, which was a pretty popular law firm in the area. He married Clorinda Carpenter in 1821. He actually moved to Lyons, New York briefly and ended up coming back. He was elected to Congress in 1845, and the biggest thing he did was he co-authored a bill that created the Smithsonian. After the bill passed, he became the acting regent, and he worked on developing and building the first building, which was called the Castle. Portraits of him and his family are still on display in the Smithsonian as a creator. He died on October 4th, 1869. He's buried in Oakwood. So next time you go to the Smithsonian in Washington, you can actually go down and learn about him and see his photos, him and his family. This is an easy one. All right, that's an easy one. That's Garrett Smith. He was born in Utica in 1797. He took over his father, Peter Smith, land business after his graduation from Hamilton College. He was an active temperance campaigner, built one of the first temperance hotels in the country in Peterborough. He helped support John Brown financially on his raid in Harper's Ferry. He helped organize the Liberty Party in 1840. He was a presidential nominee from Peterborough in 1848 and 1852. Ran for governor of New York, and he was elected to the New York State House of Representatives in 1848. He did not last very long. He tended to be very long-winded in his speeches, and he grew tired of it and came back to Peterborough. After Brown was caught on the raid to Harper's Ferry, he actually had a mental breakdown and spent time in a Utica asylum. But he came back. He supported women's rights. He was a big supporter of anything social, really. He was a cousin of Elizabeth Cady Stanton. He died in New York City in 1874, and he's buried in Peterborough Cemetery. I'll give you one hint. Cornell. It's a big hint because it's his last name. Ezra Cornell. Ezra Cornell was born in Westchester County, New York in 1807. His family had Quaker background, and believe it or not, the Ryder was actually a very large Quaker community. There was a part of the Ryder called Quaker Basin, which is where he came to live with his family. He decided to set out on his own, and he purchased a patent for a plow and started selling it. He walked all through the United States and the eastern seaboard, really, and sold this plow. During his travels, he met a guy by the name of F.O.J. Smith who had won a contract to lay lead pipe that would carry telegraph wires. And he actually patented a plow that, if you can visualize a single plow that would be towed by a horse, it actually had a big wheel behind it, and it would actually lay the wire as it plowed. So as the plow was pulled forward, it would lay the tubing. But there was a real big flaw with the piping. Can anybody guess what it was? What would happen if it broke? You had to dig it all up, you had to pull all the piping out, and you had to fix the problem. And you had to figure out where the problem was. And that was a huge deal. So he actually figured, and if you ever go to Cornell University, there's a wonderful display of his drawings. He actually has drawings of what would now be we would call telephone wires. It's a long T-shaped pole with wires going from one to another. And he was one of the first guys to help create a telephone pole. He helped found a company called Western Union. Ever heard of that? In 1861, he actually sold his shares of Western Union, made just a little bit of money off of that, and decided he wanted to come back to the community and help start an agricultural college. They passed a law called the Morrill Act, which made a big push for the creation of agricultural colleges, and he helped design and create Cornell University. Received its initial charter in 1865. 3 years later, it opened. He died on December 9th of 1874, and he's buried under the Sage Chapel at Cornell University. This is a hard one. If you ever watch PBS, she's on PBS every now and again. No guess?
No.
This is Mary Lucinda Bonney. She was born in Hamilton in 1816. She was educated at Troy Female Seminary near Albany. It was one of the finest schools you could go to. She became a teacher in 1850, co-founded the Chestnut Street Female Seminary in Philadelphia. She served for 38 years as the school's president, helping it move to another site. While they moved to a place called Ogons, Pennsylvania, she became active with some missionary groups. And after retirement, she turned her attention towards Native American issues. She became an advocate of Native American land rights, attempting to get the government to honor its treaties. That doesn't sound familiar at all. Her work getting petitions was a catalyst for the Dawes Act, which attempted to survey and give ownership of the land to the Native American. She actually ended up with some 50,000 signatures in her petitions. Later in life, she married a gentleman by the name of Thomas Rambo and returned to Hamilton. She died on July 24th, 1900, and she's buried in Woodlawn Cemetery in Hamilton.
There's a Bonnie Hill in Hamilton named after her.
Is there? That was one after
Pine Street.
Behind Pine Street?
Oh, no. At the end of Hamilton, at the end of Payne Street.
Okay.
Yeah.
This guy did two big things. No. Have you ever had a filling? Has anybody ever had a gold filling? This is Edward Maynard. Edward Maynard was the man who developed the gold filling. On top of that, he was a firearm creator. He was a lot of things. He was born in the town of Madison in 1813. His father, Moses, was the sheriff for the town of Madison, amongst a lot of other things. He attended Hamilton Academy, and then actually enrolled in the U.S. Military Academy briefly. Some illnesses forced him out. He decided to move to Washington. He studied anatomy, architecture, drawing, civil engineering, and dentistry. Wow. Name one student that would do that today. His research in fillings led him to be one of the first dentists to use gold as a filling substance. And he was actually offered the position of court dentist to Nicholas I, the Tsar of Russia, which he politely declined. He also was a firearms developer. And he developed what's called a breech loading rifle. If you can think of a rifle that breaks in half where they put the two bullets in, that's what a breech loading rifle is. He created a rifle that had supreme accuracy compared to what was. It was actually purchased and used by the Confederate troops in the Civil War. He was scheduled to go to mass production with the Massachusetts Firearm Company in 35 and 50 caliber, and the company promptly burned down. So it never made mass production, but it was used. I forgot to bring them with me tonight, but if you ever want to see, I have lead bullets that were used in that rifle that a gentleman gave me at the county history office and the county clerk's office. Any guesses? Is anybody a Loomis gang historian here? He's not a Loomis. He's the guy who tried the Loomises. James Warren and I was born in DeRuyter. He was educated at home. He actually went to work as a sleigh driver, a carriage driver, to make some money before attending law school. He passed the bar in 1839. At the age of 25 years old, he passed the bar. Became the Madison County District Attorney the same year. At 25 years old, he was a district attorney for a county. That would never happen today. Became a Madison County judge in 1840. He ran for Congress in 1848, didn't win. He oversaw court cases dealing with the Loomis gang, a few assault cases, among other things. We have those on record at the county. After he lost his bid for Congress, he moved to Syracuse, became the president of the Metropolitan Police Commission. And he actually became friends with Abraham Lincoln, and he was appointed the territory governor of Nevada in 1861 at the outbreak of the war. He held that position for 4 years till Nevada officially became a state, and he became the first state senator in Nevada. Upon his entry into the Union, as I said, he became one of the first two senators. He was the first one. He returned to New York City after his defeat in 1876. He died there, and he's buried in Woodlawn Cemetery. Come on, this is Canastota.
Spencer.
Yes, this is an easy one. This is Charles Spencer. He was born in 1813 on Quality Hill. Was educated at Casanova Seminary, Hobart College, and Hamilton College. A lot of different places. By 1838, he was publishing ads advertising himself as a maker of microscopes and telescopes. It is believed he was the first American to make achromatic objective, which is a lens that corrects the misalignment of light. No clue what that means. Actually, I do a little bit. Basically, it lines stuff up so you can see the light a little better. He published numerous catalogs, and by the 1850s, he had a partner in his business, E.K. Keaton. It's not there anymore, but he actually built a telescope for the Hamilton College Observatory. I think I have a note on that here. Let's see. He built the college for that, and that was used to actually bring in a world-famous I have astronaut in my head, and that's not astronomer, who only stayed briefly at Hamilton College, and it actually went into disarray in the 1920s and was torn down sometime after that. But by 1873, Canastota, a fire destroyed his shop. And he tried to make a go of it, but he had a lot of instruments that he had made by hand to do his work, and he lost all that in the fire. Got an opportunity in 1875 to go to Geneva and build microscopes for the Geneva Optical Company. Took that opportunity and ran with it with his son. They lasted for 3 years working for them before they parted ways. He stayed in Geneva for a little while. His son continued to make lenses. He actually died in 1881. He's buried in Mount Pleasant Cemetery in Canastota. There's a neat article in the early 1900s that talks about how he was forgotten in his impact. In Europe, they thought that he was cheating somehow, and he had found a secret way to make lenses better, and they didn't know how to stop him. So kind of an interesting story. He didn't get the fame he probably should have, but he was a huge impact in the optical world. Any guesses? Do we have any teachers in the room? This is Myrtilla Minor. She was born in Brookfield. She was educated at the Clover Street Seminary in Rochester. She became a teacher at various places, but she actually kind of got her education, for lack of a better way of putting it, at the Newton Female Institute in Waitsville, Mississippi in 1846. She asked permission to allow African American girls to be taught at her school, and she was promptly denied. Now remember, this is now 15 years before the start of the Civil War, asking to do this in the South. In 1851, she got some help from some Quaker backers, and she opened a normal school for colored girls in Washington, D.C. And one of the helpers was Johns Hopkins, one of the Quaker helpers. Another financial donor was Harriet Beecher Stowe that helped her get this off the ground. The school was formed. What she wanted to do was teach African American girls how to become teachers so they could go back into their communities and teach the girls there. The school became quite famous. She actually died, she stepped down in 1861, she died in 1864, but the school continued on without it. Her school eventually became the minor normal school in 1929, became a 4-year teaching college in 1955, and it is currently what they call the University of District of Columbia. They actually are celebrating her this year. This is their 2011 was their 150th anniversary, and they celebrated her as the mother of their school. This is the school. It still exists today. It was built in 1914. It opened. It still carries her name. There are a number of schools in the Washington area that carry her name. The Myrtilla Minor School. Any guesses? This is John Palmer Usher. John Palmer Usher was born in Brookfield. A lot of people in the early part of the Brookfield. 1816. Moved to Indiana after his education, Terre Haute to be exact. But he kind of traveled on his way there, and he met a young lawyer by the name of Abraham Lincoln. And they became friends. And they kept in contact. 1862, after Lincoln had taken office, Lincoln asked Usher to serve as the Assistant Secretary to the Interior to a gentleman by the name of Caleb Blood Smith. It was kind of a rule that the Secretary of the Interior of that era was from Indiana. Indiana was a powerful state, and they felt that they were owed a seat, and that was generally the one they got. He actually wanted a position in the Indiana government that Caleb Blood Smith wanted, and Caleb Blood Smith resigned due to illness and also to take this position. In December of 1862, on January 1st, 1863, John Palmer Usher was sworn in as the Secretary of the Interior of the United States during the Civil War. At this point in time, the Secretary of the Interior was a little different, dealt mostly with Indian affairs. He spent a lot of his time dealing with issues in the Midwest. After Lincoln was assassinated, he was kind of seen as the weakest and quietest individual, and he was asked to step down, which he did. He went on to become the General Solicitor for the Union Pacific Railroad and helped foresee it going from Kansas City west, was a big part of that. He died of cancer in 1889. He's buried in Lawrence, Kansas, home of the Kansas Jayhawks. Emily Chubbuck Judson, you might know her as Fanny Forrester, was her pen name. Was an author. She's born in Eaton. She attended local schools and got into youth seminary in 1840 and published her first book called Charles Lane. As I said, she published under the name Fanny Forrester. In 1846, she released a book called Alderbrook Tales. Today it would be called Eatonbrook Tales. It was about tales along Eatonbrook. She released it. It was a collection of her essays from magazines and other newspapers. She married a missionary named Adoran Judson in 1846, and she went on a mission with him. They went to Burma. They returned there again a couple times. She came home. They came back in 1850. He passed away. She basically had time to help write her husband's biography and kind of settle the estate, and she passed away at a very young age in 1854. She's buried at Madison Street Cemetery in Hamilton. Any guesses?
John Deere?
I'm going to guess it has to do with Alice or Chalmers. This is Edward Alice. Edward Alice was born in Cazenovia. He actually went to school in Cazenovia. He attended Union College in 1845 with the thought that he was going to become a lawyer. Instead, he decided to move to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. That's what a lot of people that might go to law school do. Upon his arrival, he opened a tannery in Two Rivers, Wisconsin. That tannery would go on to become one of the biggest of the world. But he sold his share in it, and he led an investor group that purchased a place called Reliance Works Iron and Steel Mill. And they made a lot of things during their time. They actually made steam engines, and then they made steam piping, among other things. And they would sell this to cities like Chicago and places like that. The company was not doing well when he initially bought it, and he immediately bought out all his partners, kind of thinking what could be. He built a new mill to produce iron piping to go with his steam engines. Pretty quickly after that, within 20 years, it was one of the largest employers in the city of Milwaukee. He died in 1889, and he's kind of an interesting character because he became a governor nominee for the Greenback Party, which was kind of bringing paper money to the world. But when he died, his company was kind of left to management. The company merged a number of times, and in 1901, it merged with two other companies to become Allis-Chalmers. Allis-Chalmers started producing tractors around 1914, 1915. They're still around today. They're part of a conglomerate. But his original thought, his mill, was part of that original company that came together. I'll give you a hint. That's his last name. Any guesses on the first one? I heard it close. Samuel. Samuel Mott was born in Half Moon, New York. It's a great town name. In 1845, he took over his family's cider mill in Saratoga County. Now, there's kind of some discrepancy because the Mott's website will tell you that's roughly the time he came to Madison County. It's absolutely not true. He actually was a member of the Assembly in Saratoga County in 1859, and he didn't buy property in Madison County until 1867 or 68. He visited Bouckville. There was already some apple mills here. Cider mills, excuse me. He purchased a third interest in a cider company in Bouckville and bought out the remaining members a couple years later. He moved his family here somewhere around 1868. He started showing up. The company grew exponentially. incredibly fast, and to the point that he was amazed and expanded continuously. In 1889, some tragedy hit. His son was killed. He was a military member. He was in Arizona. He was killed by some Indians. He sold out his shares of the company. The company stayed, and he would serve in a lot of political capacities. In 1900, the company merged with W.B. Duffy of Rochester. The plant would change hands a number of times. It actually burned down in 1931 in a pretty sad fire because it was below zero and they could not get any water because it kept freezing the water lines trying to put it out. So it burned to the ground. It was actually 14 below zero according to my notes. They used the vinegar and stock to actually try and put out the fire. They were that desperate to try and get something on the flames. It didn't work. Burned down. The company closed in this area. The company now is part of Dr. Pepper and the Cadbury Egg Company. Canterbury, right? I think that's who makes Cadbury eggs. He died on April 24th, 1915, and he's buried in Woodlawn Cemetery in Hampton. How many people have eaten here in Casanova? All right, you got the last name. Now what's the first name? Mr. He appreciates that. Benjamin Brewster was born June 30th in Norwalk, Connecticut. He was actually a descendant of Elder William Brewster, who came over on the Mayflower. He attended local schools in Connecticut. He actually moved to New York to become work as a clerk. In 1849, like a lot of people, he moved west in search of gold. And he didn't find it. What he did find was a company that would sell supplies to the miners when they made their way west, and he made a fortune off of that. As I said, he made a lot of money, came back to New York City about 25 years later and became a friend of John D. Rockefeller. Rockefeller convinced him to help organize a little oil company called Standard Oil. He was one of the original shareholders of that company, made a lot of money on that as well, worked prominently in setting up elevated trains in Manhattan, and a lot of other rail companies in the Midwest setting up rail train stations. And he summered in Casanova on a regular basis. And he built a house that he called Scrooby, named after a family home back in Scotland in 1890. That home is still around today. It is the Brewster Inn restaurant, which is where it gets his name. He died of a stroke in September of 1897. He's actually buried in Evergreen Cemetery in Casanova. This may be my favorite person to talk because no one's ever heard of her.
Dr.
You got the first part. Her last name's a big city in Ohio.
Cleveland.
All right, you got the last name. Now just get the middle. Dr. Emmeline Cleveland was actually born in Ashford, Connecticut in 1829. Her family moved to Stockbridge at a very young age, at the age of 2. She was taught by private teachers at an early age. Her father paid for teachers to come and teach her and her brothers and sisters. And she attended Oberlin College with the goal of becoming a missionary. She was hoping to get married to a gentleman from the area and move on with her life. Upon graduation, though, she decided she wanted to go become a doctor. And she attended the Female Medical College, graduating in 1855. Can anybody think of one problem that a woman would have in 1855 with being a doctor? They weren't allowed to practice. They could not go in and perform surgeries because they were not allowed to see how to do it. They weren't allowed in medical rooms in that era. So to learn, she was actually sponsored by a group of Quaker women hoping to establish a hospital near Philadelphia. They sent her to France. She learned to speak French, and then she learned to study obstetrics in French. She came back in 1861. In the span of 1 year, she learned French fluently, studied obstetrics in French, became a doctor, and came back. Again, who would do that today? She came back and she became the chief resident of the Women's College of Philadelphia, which is now, I believe, Drexel University's part of their college. She developed some of the first training programs for nurses to teach people how to be nurses and be nurses' aides. She would go on to become the dean of the college and was appointed gynecologist of the Pennsylvania Hospital's Department for the Insane. She died of tuberculosis in 1878. She was originally buried on Drexel University's campus, and I wrote an article about it, and I found her obituary and wrote that, and I got a letter from a distant relative of hers in Florida, and actually she was moved back with where her husband and son were buried in Stockbridge Cemetery. So she's actually buried currently in Stockbridge Cemetery. Come on, this is an easy one. Oscar Meyer. Oscar Meyer, sing the song in your head. What's the opening line of the song? Hot dogs. All right. Oscar Meyer. Philip Danforth Arnold was born in Stockbridge in 1832. He was educated at the Casanova Academy. There were a couple stories about him getting kicked out for being in a carriage with a woman, but I can't confirm or deny that. He worked as a driver on the Canal Canal, and he left the family farm at the age of 19 to head west in search of gold. It is said he walked the entire distance to California in search of gold. Never struck gold, but he did basically become a subcontractor, and he would hire miners out that weren't working to do other jobs. He moved back to Milwaukee, briefly had a grocery business before moving to Chicago, where he started a grain business and then went on to packing meat. And what he basically did was he set up an assembly line for meat processing. If you can imagine a pig hanging upside down, one guy would slice here, one guy would slice there, one guy would slice there, and it would come out. The other thing that he did was he used every part of the animal. And if anybody's ever heard of Dial Soap, that was an offshoot of his meatpacking company because they used some of the products to make the soap. Animal fat is a common product for soap. He also was one of the first companies to use refrigerated cars to transfer meat to and forth. There was one other company in Chicago that did it, but he bought a lot more. The book The Jungle by Upton Sinclair was actually written about his factories. Unfortunately, he was dead for about 5 years when the book was written. So a lot of times he's kind of looped into that, and he was gone by that point. Although he was known as kind of a hard butt, for lack of a better term. If you didn't like the wage you got, that's fine. He'll fire you, and he'll find someone else that'll work for it. He died in 1901 from pneumonia. He's buried in Graceland Cemetery in Chicago. Any guesses? George? No. Lyman Gage was born in DeRuyter in 1836. He was forced to quit school at the age of 14 to help the family make some money. He moved to Chicago in 1853 and became a clerk. Basically worked his way up through the system in the banking industry. And was originally offered a chance to become Grover Cleveland's Secretary of the Treasury and declined it. In 1897, he accepted William McKinley's offer to become the Secretary of the Treasury. He helped finance the Spanish-American War and contributed to the Gold Standard Act of 1999, one of the first gold standards. 1899, thank you. Stayed on briefly during Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt bugged him a great deal. Got into his business too much, and he resigned. Became president of the U.S. Trust Company of New York in 1902. And he served in that role till 1906, and then he moved to San Diego, California, where he became involved in the metaphysical movement. It's a branch of philosophy explaining fundamental nature of being in the world. I'm going to end it. He died in 1927. He's buried in Rose Hill Cemetery in Chicago. Any farmers in the room? Ford's Dairyman. Wow. You could read it right there. William Dempsterboard was born in Stockbridge in 1836. Ford worked on a popular family farm. He was a very popular musician in the area before he moved to Oak Grove, Wisconsin. The outbreak of the Civil War, he enlisted in the 4th Wisconsin Infantry as a musician. He actually was discharged for disability in 1862. He returned and he enlisted into the New York Artillery. We don't know what happened to him from there. More than likely, he never made it. He formed a local newspaper in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin in 1870 called Ford's Dairyman to promote dairy farming in 1885 actually did that. The magazine is still published today. You can go to their website and read a lot of their articles. It's a very nice website. He was elected governor of Wisconsin in 1888, served until 1891. He died in 1918 and he's buried in Fort Atkinson Cemetery in Wisconsin. You should be able to guess what he did at least. Any guesses?
Give us a clue. Come on.
Charles Fairchild was born in Casanova, attended local schools before attending Harvard Law and Harvard Regular College. Upon graduation, he went to work becoming Attorney General of New York State in 1875. In 1885, he was appointed Assistant Secretary to the Treasurer. 2 years later, he replaced Daniel Manning when Manning resigned. Due to a surplus of money, he actually tried to get Congress to lower taxes, and they said no. He decided then to purchase back bonds from commercial banks, putting cash in the hands of the bank. Basically, these banks had the bonds. He purchased them back to give them money. Basically, he helped prevent a recession. After leaving office, he became president of the New York State Security and Trust Company. Died in November of 1924, and he's buried in Evergreen Cemetery in Cass. Susan E. Below was born in St. Louis, Missouri. She was educated initially with home tutors in private schools around Louisiana and New York. She lived in Brazil with her father, briefly, traveled to Germany where she observed the teachings of Frederick Froebel, who used children's play activities as a teaching device. And basically what he did is as they played, he would use whatever they were doing to teach them. She took this idea home to St. Louis in 1873, where she started the first American kindergarten class. The class featured bright colors, small furniture, plants, books, and toys that the children could use to learn. By 1879, 6 years later, there were 53 kindergarten classrooms in St. Louis, Missouri. She retired in 1884, and she moved to Casanova. Somewhere between 1884 and 1889, she lived with her sister. She purchased a home on Sullivan Street. In 1895, she would continue to write books, lecture on early childhood education, right up until a few weeks before her death in 1916. She's buried in Bellefontaine Cemetery in St. Louis.
Was she the one who called it a kindergarten?
No, it's actually a German word, and I don't remember off the top of my head where it came from.
But not because she was in.
No, it was called kindergarten before.
Okay.
The building burned down 5 or 6 years ago. Marcellus. National Casket Company. Any guesses on who that is? Chester Will Chapel was born in Casanova, went to school in Casanova, became a clerk, sold his interest and moved to Kansas. Didn't like Kansas that much and came right back home. In 1876, he purchased a business that made robes for burial. And he went, this is a pretty lucrative business, but I bet I can make some more money doing some other things. So he saw the possibility in the production of caskets, kind of dark, but go for it. He formed a new company that sold anything dealing with death, including caskets, called Chapel, Chase, and Maxwell Company. The company exploded. They opened factories in New York City, New Jersey, along with having one in Oneida. In 1890, the company consolidated with the two largest firms to become the National Casket Company, headquartered in Oneida, New York. It was the largest casket company producer in the United States. He became president in 1903. He died in what is believed to be the first car accident in Madison County in July 18, 1909, and is buried in Glenwood Cemetery. His car accident is kind of sad. He had been under the weather for a while and decided he wanted to go out and get some fresh air, and they were actually driving down Route 5, and somewhere kind of in between here and Chittenango, they realized there was a storm coming, so he told his driver to turn around, and they were flooring it, driving incredibly fast at roughly 40 miles an hour. And as they came around a bend, there was a carriage and horses. And the driver swerved to miss the carriage. And there was a number of passengers in the car. Mr. Chapel was the only one who was killed. The rest of them were actually all pretty much okay. This is the only non-human in the talk. Does anybody know what song this comes from? Okay, Can't Count Races. Does anybody know who the horse they were singing about was? Flora Temple was born in Waterville in 1845. The story says she was sired by a horse belonging to the Loomis King. She was sold to a livery stable in Eaton in 1849. 1 year later, she was sold to a New York City resident for $350, and he turned her into a harness racing horse. In 1852, she won her first professional race against Brown Jim. Over 9 years, she won 92 races. 10 races win a year. However many she lost on top of it. That's a ton of races. She was the first horse to break the 2-minute, 20-second mile, equaled or lowered her record 6 times. She was sold in 1858. So in 1850, she was sold for $350. In 1858, she sold for $8,000. She was immortalized in Camptown races as the bobtailed nag. She died December 21st, 1877. I don't know where she's buried. All right, that was an easy one. He was born in Chittenango. He didn't live in Chittenango very long. His father had a prosperous barrel factory on Route 13, and they moved to the Roselawn Estate in what is now Brewerton Road in Manning. In his early adulthood, he did a number of jobs, including poultry farmer, actor, publisher, fireworks salesman, news reporter, and a whole lot more. In 1897, he moved to Chicago and started writing for the Evening Post. It was actually his mother-in-law. He married a woman by the name of Maud Gage. Anybody know who Maud Gage's mother was? Matilda Joslyn Gage was the one who told him to write down his stories and try and get them published. And these were stories he told his sons. So in 1900, he published The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, to much acclaim and celebration. He wrote 13 sequels to the original with numerous other books. He wrote a number of different styles of books. He died on May 6, 1919, after suffering a stroke. He's buried in Forest Lawn Memorial Park Cemetery in Glendale, California.
We're not answering that one.
Yeah, I heard it somewhere. Castler, Herman Castler, was born in Sandwich, Illinois in 1867. He grew up in Fort Plain, New York. Worked for General Electric as a draftsman before moving to Canastota to take a job with the Marvin Electric Drill Company. He helped to develop the mutoscope, which showed movies flipping cars. Spun by a hand crank, working off a design that was originally patented by Thomas Edison. He ended up leaving Edison, formed the American Mutoscope Company in 1895 with William Kennedy Dixon, Elias Cookman, and Henry Marvin. They developed a projector that used 68 millimeter film in 1896. They changed the company name to the American Mutoscope and Biograph Company in 1899, and will go on to develop projectors for 35 millimeter film, and worked with the company until about 1921. Died in Canastota in 1939, and he's buried back in his home, Fort Plain Cemetery. If you want to learn more about him, there's this lovely museum kind of around the corner. It's got a whole bunch of neat stuff. I would highly suggest checking it out. You know this one, Joe? This is a Canastota guy.
Another Canastota guy. Gee. No, I don't.
Well, everybody knows a lot of physics, right? Lester German moved to Canastota, attended schools there before going to Cornell University and graduated in 1917. Took a job with Bell Labs briefly before becoming a fighter pilot in World War I. We have his military records at the county. He won a bunch of different stars for meritorious battle. After he returned, he earned a PhD from Columbia University, and he worked on a project with a gentleman by the name of Clinton Davison to prove the wave-particle duality of matter. Basically, he proved electrons scatter. This research, he was given the award Elliott Cresson Medal in 1931. This research led to the development of the electron microscope, which in turn led to numerous breakthroughs in medical and pretty much any field you can think of. Later in life, he became a rock climber at the age of 75 while climbing rocks. He had a heart attack when he died in 1971. Not sure where he is buried. This is the last one of the night. Be neat if it was. This is Dr. John Atanasoff. He was born in Hamilton, lived in Hamilton very briefly, moved to Florida with his family, got a degree from the University of Florida in electrical engineering, earned a master's in mathematics from Iowa State, and a PhD from the University of Wisconsin in theoretical physics. He was hired by Iowa State as a professor in mathematics and physics, received a grant for $650 in 1939 after having a breakthrough on the idea of how to improve the Monroe calculator. The basic idea used kind of some computer jargon, binary math to solve linear equations, up to 29 problems at one time. The computer is commonly referred to as the Atanasoff Berry computer. Clifford Berry was his graduate assistant. The idea was taken and kind of used in other projects and ended up becoming what would now become the modern day computer. There was a bunch of lawsuits dealing with who actually created it. The final lawsuit said that others did not first invent the automatic digital computer, but instead derived the subject from one Dr. John Vincent Atanasoff. He died in 1995, and he's buried in Pine Grove Cemetery in Mount Airy, Maryland. And I'm going to end it with this. I originally asked the historians, of which David Albert from the town of Canastota was one who sent a number of them, to send me who they think impacted American history. I think in this talk I have 26. They sent back almost 200. So this is by no means the end of the line. And I could have gone into John Humphrey Noyes about another 12 guys, including David Watson from Canastota. One of the first soldiers to die in World War II was from Fenner, died in the Pearl Harbor attacks. So we could have gone on a number of different people, and I'll probably someday do part 2 of this. But if you ever want to learn more, there's so many great people and so many great things that came from this town, this county. I can't stress it enough. There's a wonderful history here and many social movements, many events that are wonderful throughout the county. And if you would like, I don't think I have a pen with me, but we actually have a mailing list that we send out all the events that happen throughout the county. We'd love to add you to that mailing list via email. We send it out once a month. We also encourage you to visit www.MadisonCountyNYHistory.com. Each town has a brief history on something that happened in the town, whether it be Brookfield, the Brookfield Fair. I honestly don't remember what Lenox is. Sullivan has information on the Chittenango Landing Canal Boat Museum with some lovely photos that they let us use. And there's a great write-up on Colonel William Smith in Lebanon, who was the first person we talked about tonight. Questions, comments, or rude remarks?
Excellent job.
Thank you. Nothing? Well, thank you for coming.
This guy here has only been around 2 years, and look what he's done. I mean, he's got more knowledge than...
Yeah, not enough.
Well, that's his philosophy, see? So he keeps going on, and he gets more and more all the time. And he learns something, and we all do. And so I got to say, again, it's a great pleasure to know Matt. So,
have you experienced that these kinds of genius or dedication have waned in this area? And if so, do you have any theories about that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, Lester Germer, those guys were all mid-1900s. I think that it's harder. Back then, you didn't leave. And if you did leave, back then you didn't leave.
L-E-A-V-E?
Yeah. Garrett Smith did all of his stuff from Peterborough. So many of these people stayed. Today, so many people leave. As I said at the beginning, General Giamastino, and I'm butchering that name. Thank you. His sister is actually the director of the Lorenzo House in Casanova. And he went on to become a great military leader. So I just don't think we hear about it as much anymore. And the other thing is, in this day and age, we have so much stuff available to us. I couldn't tell you. I'm sure there's people that are doing something incredibly important with scientific research we just don't hear about. And normally you don't hear about until there's an obituary about that person, which is sad, but that's kind of the case. Anything else?
I understand that there's an armor, Mr. Armor buried over in Hoboken, just outside of Marysville, with meatpacking.
She's not here tonight, but I don't think that's the same Philip Armor. He had brothers that were involved with him. Philip was kind of the face of the company, for lack of a better way to put it. So it might have been one of his brothers. And the family stayed. He was the only one that left initially. So his family was still here. His father and the family farm stayed.
I understand. I've been told that one armor lives over there, and says armor on it.
There's a website, and I don't remember it off the top of my head, that Sandy Wilsey, amongst others, run, that actually lists all of the burials in Madison County. Well, as many as they can find. If you Google Madison County, New York, because there's a lot of Madison counties, if you Google Madison County, New York cemeteries, you can actually find it. And you can actually type in the last name and probably find it. But Armour is a relatively common name in this county, so it wouldn't surprise me at all.
I read somewhere that George Eastman was born in Waterville,
Correct. His house was actually moved to
Montford.
Genesee County Village.
Montford.
Yeah. Yeah, he was born in Waterville. He moved at a relatively young age, though. That's the county over, though. I don't know that technically. Yes.
There were so many people who came from the southern part of the county in your presentation. Was that just because of the people that you chose, or were there more people during that time?
You got to remember,
rather than up here, up
when
north?
Madison County developed, when any place first developed, it has to develop near water. And as much as you guys have Oneida Lake over here, at the time, the streams and the canals, Eaton Brook Creek, Chittenango Creek, the one along the border of Brookfield that's escaping me, Unadilla, all those were where developments kind of originally started. And what happens is when the canals start to come in and allow people to travel and have a way to go, and then when the thruway system comes through, that kind of brings everybody north. And even today, if you look at how New York State's population is, something like 85% is along a major highway. So basically everybody followed the mode of travel. So prior to 1850, there wasn't, I mean, Canastota had the canal, but like Oneida didn't become a village until, I want to say the 1850s, 1860s. Didn't become a city until 1898. You know, in 1890, 1895 or 1898, Lenox, Oneida was part of Lenox, as was Lincoln. That was the last kind of break in the county. So realistically, basically, as commerce shifted, so did the people. So when the canal came in, everybody could get a job at a mill, a factory along the canal. That's when people started coming here. And a lot of people were born in those southern places and went elsewhere. I hope that answers it.
So the person who went to California for the metaphysics, this was a center of metaphysical activity, wasn't it? But was that before?
This is sometimes called the burned over district. I don't know enough about the religious movements to say. The reason Garrett Smith's wife was actually part of that movement. The Fox sisters, which were from Rochester, that kind of, not psychic, but that kind of idea kind of came through everywhere. Everybody was kind of burned. The reason it's called the burned over district is we were all kind of tired of organized religion for a brief period. So some different religions came in. From what I've read and what I've seen, Lyman Gage was more about kind of understanding nature, whereas the burned over idea was a lot like the Fox sisters would try and seances and stuff like that. I don't think it was the same idea. Anything else? Feel free to ask. Well, again, I thank you for coming. I hope you had a good time. And I think you guys